All right, good afternoon. My name is Jeff Herman, Jeffherman. I'm an attorney with Herman Law. We call this press conference today to announce the filing of a lawsuit that I filed yesterday against the Diocese of Rockville Centre out of New York and against the Diocese of St. Petersburg, which is headquartered right behind me. What this case describes is a crime that was committed at the highest levels of the Catholic Church in America. It involves two bishops and a pedophile priest. It's a story, unfortunately, that we've heard before, but we continue to hear more of these kinds of horrific stories that literally has destroyed so many lives. The two bishops involved in this case are, number one, Bishop McGann, who was the bishop of the Diocese of Rockville Centre. He was appointed by the Pope. The other bishop involved in this case is Bishop Larkin, who was the bishop of the Diocese of St. Petersburg, also appointed by the Pope. The pedophile priest is a priest by the name of Father Robert Hennicky. In 1980, a victim of Father Hennicky, who was now 24 years old, wrote a letter to Bishop McGann at the Diocese of Rockville Centre to report that he was sexually molested by Father Hennicky. And he wrote for the sole purpose of protecting other children in the future. This young man, John, reported that he was molested over a period of years by Father Hennicky, and that he hoped that with this information, Bishop McGann could immediately take responsible action and protect kids from being molested in the future. Unfortunately, these requests were ignored. Over a period of about 2 years, John wrote 7 letters to Bishop McGann. I have a copy of those letters, which I will give to you. The first one I have is February 13th, 1980, where John describes that Father Hennicky molested me. And he says, "I'm writing this letter for one reason. I feel responsibility to those young boys who may be approached sexually by Father Hennicky. I feel that giving you this information is the best way to prevent another person from having an experience similar to me." After receiving this notice, Father McGann engaged in a conspiracy to conceal this information. He did not report it. The only thing he told John he would do is put his letter in a confidential file for Father Hennicky. McGann also reported to John that Father Hennicky admitted to molesting boys, but he said he felt he wouldn't do it anymore. John said that's not enough. Remove him, protect children. At some point, Father Hennicky comes down to the Diocese of St. Petersburg. John learns about this, and he fires off a letter to Bishop Larkin. That letter is dated August 7th, 1981. And in this letter, John tells Bishop Larkin that Father Hennicky, who is now working at Christ the King Church, is a sexual predator, that he molested him, and that he's telling him he needs to take action, obviously, to protect the kids. At this point, according to the allegations in the complaint, a young 9-year-old boy is now being molested here at Christ the King Church by Father Hennicky. But it doesn't stop there, because after receiving this letter, Father Hennicky ends up at Christ the King School. As we allege in the complaint, Father Hennicky then sexually assaults a young 9-year-old boy. That boy's name is Mark Cattell, and that's my client in this case for whom I brought this case for. Mark is now a 45-year-old man. He's a lawyer. He's actually a magistrate with the Supreme Court of Virginia. But he's been suffering for years. It isn't until the last couple of years that he's able to put together all his issues he's had with his life and connecting this to the abuse. He got married about 2.5 years ago, and for him it was the first time he was able to process what happened. And so he's trying to move forward with his life. The Diocese of Rockville Center has evaded responsibility and being held accountable because of some archaic statute of limitations laws in New York. But because Heneke was sent to Florida courts have jurisdiction over the Diocese of Rockville Center, and this case seeks to hold them accountable. They can't hide behind the statute of limitations in New York in this case. We believe that this is the proper venue and that a court here will be able to hold them accountable. One of the shocking things to me about this case is that the Diocese of St. Petersburg has these letters. They know what's in the file. They know that Bishop Larkin was told that Father Heneke was a pedophile. They never contacted the authorities. They never told the families of the boys who were being potentially molested by Father Heneke that their boys were exposed to a sexual predator. And in fact, they left him for a period of time at the school where he continued to molest my client Mark. With all that background, it's shocking to me as to how Bishop Larkin's name is being honored here at the diocese. Why is his name still up there? Why haven't they taken his name off? Even in Hollywood, Harvey Weinstein's name is persona non grata. He's been removed from positions of honor. Is it possible that Hollywood has more ethics and morals than the Catholic Church? I guess we'll find out. I don't know why it takes a lawsuit for action to be taken, but apparently it does. This moving priests around is known as passing the trash. In this case, it occurred from New York to Florida, and then after Florida, Heneke went back to New York. We've seen it, priests coming from Pennsylvania to Florida. We've seen this happen literally all over the country. Finally, we see that now attorney generals of various states are doing things. In fact, in Florida, the Attorney General Pam Bondi has opened up her own investigation to investigate and expose the crimes that were committed by the Catholic Church. In New York, the Attorney General is also conducting their investigation. For the first time in decades, there's an opportunity for these victims to have a voice and to begin the healing process. Unfortunately, it's much too late for many people, although some healing is better than none. It would have been the right thing to do, the legal thing to do, the moral thing to do, and the ethical thing to do for Bishop Larkin and Bishop McGann to expose Father Heneke for the pedophile priest he was and save lives. Unfortunately, that didn't happen, and that's why we're here today. I'll take any questions.
The Diocese of St. Petersburg just released a statement a little while ago. I don't know if you had a chance to read it. It was just about 10 minutes ago. They said that they were unaware of any prior misconduct with minors when he was assigned to St. Petersburg and that he came here with a recommendation letter from his bishop. You just said that they were aware.
Well, what they're saying is true, potentially, that they didn't know, which is why John wrote Bishop Larkin a letter in 1981 to specifically tell him that he was a sexual predator. On August 7th, 1981, Bishop Larkin received a letter from John where he says, in February of 1980, I wrote to the Bishop of Rockville Center, John R. McGann, to relate to him, and he goes on to talk about what happened. He says, Father Henneke sexually molested me. And at the end of the letter, he says, my original goal in pursuing this matter remains the same. I wish to prevent others from having an experience similar to mine.
I did obviously bring that up and reach out to them for a response, but I will go on, and you'll have a chance to read this. I'll forward it to you. But in response to, of course, Bishop Larkin, all they say is, Henneke died in 2002. Bishop Thomas Larkin, who is mentioned in this lawsuit, died in 2006. What would you say to a response where they're saying, well, these individuals are both dead?
Well, first of all, there's the silence in their statement about what happened, about receiving this letter, and their failure to respond immediately is deafening. That silence is deafening. I was waiting for you to say in their statement, well, yeah, we did receive notice on August 7th, 1981, and we immediately called the police and told the families and removed him. Obviously, we know that didn't happen. Why are they being silent about that? And all they want to do is talk about how now the bishop and the priest are dead? Well, the victim's alive, and his pain lives on. So he's not dead. So we should forget about it because the bishop who committed the crime along with the priest are dead? No, we won't have it.
Jeff, they said they removed that priest in 1982 after a child came forward saying he was abused. Is that good?
No, and see what they're saying, that's right. They removed him in 1982, but they knew in 1981. That's the problem, is for almost a year, they left Father Henneke in the school with the kids, and that's when he sexually assaulted, forced 9-year-old Mark to perform oral sex on him. Why wasn't he removed in 1981 in August when they got the letter?
Is Mark the reason he was removed, or is there?
No, this would be another victim. But I'll tell you something interesting too. Let me read you the response of Bishop Larkin. On August 14th, 1981, he says to John, I received your letter on August 7th, 1981, relative to Father Robert Henneke. I appreciate your taking the time to inform me of this matter, and I shall keep it in mind in our personnel placements. I was not aware of the situation until I received your letter. So that begs the question. You keep it in mind in personnel placements, then you put him at the school where he molests kids?
When was that letter written? What's the date?
August 14th, 1981. If the Diocese of St. Petersburg is telling you that they removed them in 1982, they're admitting to aiding and abetting a pedophile priest.
What's a remedy your lawsuit is looking for? What do you?
So what I filed is 2 different counts, one for what's called intentional infliction of emotional distress, and one called vicarious liability. Basically, it's a claim to hold the diocese, both of them, legally and financially responsible for the harm that they caused to Mark.
Are you concerned that there are other victims also who may be out there?
Absolutely. I'm confident there are many, many more victims. In fact, we just heard reference to one. And I know afterwards, and I know from Henneke's history, that there are a number of victims. Unfortunately, a typical pedophile over a lifetime has 100 to 200 victims. It gets worse when they get empowered and emboldened, because when they get caught and they're not stopped. So yeah, I mean, one of the reasons victims like Mark come forward publicly like this is because they realize it's the worst thing for a victim to suffer in silence. And so oftentimes when you see victims come forward, there's this collective empowerment that helps other victims to feel it's safe to come forward and tell their story. You know, remember, these kids were abused as kids, and what's imprinted in their mind is that their age of abuse keeps them at that level. So in other words, when they think of the abuse, they're back at that young age. And so it's so hard to come forward and to stand up for the young child inside of you that's been abused. But that's why I say with this collective empowerment, when other victims come forward, and that's what's so good about this Attorney General investigation, is that hopefully this encourages victims to come forward. And I'm hearing from new victims every day since the Attorney General announced her investigation.
So what's the overall plan looking forward? I mean, for your case, not for your case in particular, but overall, the statute of limitations here, you can actually apply this, but as you mentioned, in New York, it's different. You couldn't have done it in New York. So looking forward, what's the overall goal as a nation for these victims of sexual abuse scandals involving the church?
Right. Well, so New York, there's a possibility that a legislation will be enacted called the Child Victims Act, which will create a window to allow victims to bring older cases. It's critical, and this case highlights the need for it, because there's many victims of Father Henneke in New York who aren't able to bring their claims in Florida. And so we hope that the legislators will do the right thing finally this year and pass this act. That will allow, number one, victims to have a voice, and also very important, it allows the system to expose predators who are out there right now have not yet been exposed because no legal action can be brought against them. And so, yeah, so that's what we hope. We hope that bringing attention to this issue will allow legislators to do the right thing. Pennsylvania has a bill pending now as well, where they're going to potentially open up a window. And so this is really a turning point in our country in terms of, I think, justice for survivors. And hopefully we look back on this year and we see that this was the initiative that really turned things around, and so we can clean up our country, clean up our system. It's not enough to say, oh, well, things are different today. That ignores, thousands or millions of victims who are out there who aren't getting help right now, and predators that are out there are not being exposed because of the archaic statute of limitations.
I had one other question, and
Yeah.
it's just that because we've heard this question regarding similar cases or cases like this, why does it take, in some cases, 30 years to come forward?
Right. Well, and that's a good question. It's different for everybody. What we know is a couple things that's consistent. First of all, 90% of kids are abused by somebody they know. It's typically not the stranger. And when they're abused, they've usually been groomed. Grooming is a process where a pedophile predator gains the trust over a period of time of his intended victim or her. Usually they're male perpetrators by far. And so in that case, you have a man who's grooming a child. In some cases, they're a priest, and so they have all this inherent trust already. By the time the child's being sexually molested, they're what we call a compliant victim. They're physically participating, they're not screaming and fighting, and so they feel like they've done something wrong. They're not consenting, obviously, they're kids. But it's very complicated. They feel guilty. They feel confused. In this case, Mark was told by the priest not to talk about this. The other victim who came forward and reported initially was told by Father Henneke that if he didn't comply with what they were doing, he'd be an evil Christian and God would punish him. So there's this power in scaring these kids. So these kids grow up and they're suffering, and they don't even understand necessarily why. In Mark's case, he was suffering. He had issues, lots of issues, and he was not dealing with what happened, not processing what happened. As I said, it wasn't until he got married where he met this wonderful woman, and for the first time he was able to begin to process, and he started to connect the dots, and he started to see that things in his life, lots of issues, were connected to the abuse. And then, of course, he learns that the church knew about Henneke and didn't protect him. And so all those things now create this environment where this is why cases are being filed now.
How did you find out that the church knew about this?
Well, one of the ways is that John, the original victim, one of the original victims who wrote these letters, has become an activist. And after this Pennsylvania grand jury report, attention came on to his allegations, and those materials became available.